Hey, what's up? So it is now midnight, the 1st of June. I don't really have any videos to hide because I only have one video currently published. So today we're going to watch some things here. Yeah, this is currently my obsession. Use intros from all over the world. Yeah, I'm that kind of guy. So, yeah. Well, how about this? The awful lie about the US oil industry, because, you know, Hindsight is a really, really amazing channel. So, yeah, maybe we should do that. Or we could go this. You know. Yeah, how about we just watch some Hindsight? Because I haven't watched the hindsight videos in a while.
We've been lied to for decades.
We've got about 35 years worth of oil left in the whole world.
A major energy crisis.
For as long as we've been consuming oil, we've been running out.
In 10 years, if we do nothing, we will be importing more than half our oil at prices fixed by others.
The common narrative is that the US needs to become independent from foreign sources, or risk
An economic, social, and political crisis that will threaten our free institutions.
To free ourselves from imported oil.
But today, after decades of warnings about America running out of crude and being warned about imported oil on the surface, nothing appears to have changed. Today, the United States oil and gas industry is in its golden age. They overtook Russia in 2011 and became the world's top producer of natural gas. They overtook Saudi Arabia in 2018 and became the world's top producer of petroleum. And by 2022, they produced roughly the same amount of oil as they consumed. So you would think that they finally freed themselves of imported oil, but yet 40% of the oil they consumed was imported, and 8% of this came from Russia. We've now entered a new global energy crisis, and consumers are noticing this at the pump. Historically, whenever this happens, it starts a new cycle of dire warnings in the media. So let's take a step back and look at the origins of the oil industry in the United States and how this created a recurring narrative of doom and gloom. This is the big lie about the US oil industry. With hindsight. Okay, so this is me. And if you've been following this channel for a while, you might know that this is actually the first time that I appear on the channel myself. And the reason for that is BetterHelp, the sponsor of today's video. When I just started on this adventure of creating a YouTube channel, BetterHelp was on a very short list of sponsors that I hope to one day affiliate with this channel. And the reason for that is because I truly believe in the transformative effects of therapy. I've seen it a couple of times in my life, very up close. And I live here in a country where nobody speaks my native language. So online therapy is for me the only way to go at it. This is how it works. Go to betterhelp.com/hindsight. And you get to answer a couple of questions about yourself and your goals in therapy, but also about your personal preferences about how a therapist communicates and
I mean, should we actually just skip this? Or no? I don't know. Should we?
acts around you. Then when you're done, they sign you up with one of their 30,000 therapists, and each of them has either a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, but at least 1,000 hours of experience helping people just like you. But in the end, it's all about finding that personal connection. So if you don't like the person that they matched you with, you can easily change to somebody else in your settings. It's really that easy. So if you're ready to prioritize your mental health, go to betterhelp.com/hindsight or select hindsight at sign up for a special discount off your first month of therapy. Today, the global oil and gas industry is the largest industry in the world by revenue. It brings us more than twice as much revenue as the global tourism sector, and it's twice the size as global car manufacturing. It's a truly massive industry, and it started in the United States. In western Pennsylvania in the 1850s, it was relatively common to find sites where petroleum was seeping from the ground. Edwin Drake had been drilling for years when Seneca Oil Company decided to withdraw his funding. Drake took a personal line of credit, and just before his final funds ran out, he got lucky. On this picture, we see Drake with the nation's first refinery. A year later, Pennsylvania was the richest oil-producing region on Earth. And by 1880, the United States was responsible for 85% of the world's crude oil production. But Drake died a poor man. He never patented his drilling method, and he had not purchased much land. The oil boom grew out of his control and was ultimately tamed by the Rockefellers, who now owned 90% of US oil refineries and pipelines, and they had the world's largest fleet of oil tankers. Around that time, the attention shifted to other regions, and especially to Texas. By that time, Texas was still principally driven by agriculture. The mechanization of farm work was in full swing, enabling farmers to produce more food with fewer people. The state had invested in railroads, which drastically affected Texans' lives. But nothing could prepare them for what would happen next. At Spindletop, near Beaumont, a well-named Lucas No. 1 started gushing oil more than 100 feet into the air. It took 9 days to cap, and this discovery fueled a major oil rush in the region. A year later, the Spindletop oil field was producing 17.5 million barrels in just 1 year, out of the year's total oil production of 18 million. The discovery led to an influx of hundreds of wildcatters lusting after a piece of the action, as well as thousands of workers looking for jobs. This was followed by the emergence of related industries like supply and manufacturing firms, dealers and refineries, as well as scam artists, gamblers, and liquor dealers, all looking to get a chunk of the workers' paychecks. This was the beginning of the modern industrial era of Texas. In 1908, Henry Ford introduced his Model T, the world's first inexpensive, mass-produced car, which led to an increased demand for petroleum. And in 1911, Standard Oil had gotten so large that it was broken into smaller, separate entities. The Spindletop discovery became the birthplace of other oil giants like Texaco and Gulf Oil, and these industries had a ripple effect across the state. The railroads converted from coal to oil, and roads were paved to facilitate the use of cars. People moved to the city, and the oil money was invested in education, arts, and scientific research. It affected every aspect of the lives of Texans, but this was really just a start. If we lay US oil production on a chart, with this red line being Texas, we see that it went down in the 1900s before eventually going up and absolutely exploding since the 1920s. In 1950, Texas first produced 1 billion barrels of oil in 1 year. But here's the thing, right before oil production got into high gear, the people were made to believe something else. The US Geological Survey in 1919 predicted that oil supplies would run out within a decade. There had been widespread shortages of oil in the years prior, giving credibility to these claims. This prediction triggered the country's first nationwide oil security fears, and the recommendations were clear. First, petroleum had to be preserved. Second, and
What? Wait, one viewer? Who's watching? Okay, someone's apparently watching my live stream. I think it's me, but yeah. Yeah.
considerations were clear. First, petroleum
First, it is absolutely necessary for the preservation of an adequate supply of petroleum that all public lands where petroleum is probable should at once be withdrawn from entry.
had to be preserved. Second and third, more
Okay, second, a general investigation of the conditions of accumulation of petroleum and its geographic distribution should be undertaken in order that the petroleum-bearing public lands may be selected. Third, fundamental scientific study of the nature of petroleum, especially with a view to securing the greatest yields of the most valuable constituents and even for transmuting one oil into another, is required for its most intelligent use.
research is required, and the greatest waste of petroleum has been in exporting crude petroleum and petroleum products to foreign countries. In just a few decades since the emergence of the global oil industry, the United States had become addicted, and narratives that oil production was less than oil consumption became widely repeated. Warnings of oil shortages and seeing the United States as a dependent nation instilled fear in the American public. There were a total of 7 oil shortages before 1950, and each time there were plenty of individuals ready to prove that crude oil would be exhausted within a few years. But it never did. Here's a quote I found from 1958. "We usually find oil in new places with old ideas. Sometimes also we find oil in old places with a new idea, but we seldom find oil in an old place with an old idea. Several times in the past, we thought that we were running out of oil, whereas we were only running out of ideas." In 1950, the US Geological Survey estimated that the world's oil endowment was 600 billion barrels. This figure gradually increased to an estimated 3,000 billion barrels by the year 2000. After 5 decades of consumption, they estimate that there's now more oil left than in 1950. The oil industry has become global, and the debate about US energy has shifted focus over the decades, shaped by geopolitics, technological advances, and concerns over climate change.
I indicated that the sudden cutoff of oil from the Middle East had turned into a major energy crisis.
After the 1973 oil crisis, it increasingly centered around strategic risks. This crisis showed how external price hikes could affect the US economy. It also forced several administrations to keep relationships with some of the least democratic but very oil-rich nations. In recent years, the United States has increased its oil production, especially in Texas. Even though there are fewer active rigs, better technology has resulted in a much higher production. There's no question that at some point the oil will run out, but this is unlikely to happen within our lifetimes or even our children's lifetimes. US oil production has seldom been so high, and it finally caught up to match consumption. But yet, in 2020, the United States was still importing about 40% of their oil, and this was increasingly imported from Russia. At the time that Russia invaded Ukraine, the United States imported a record number of 672,000 barrels of petroleum per day before banning all imports. But today, of the 8 million barrels that are still being imported, little over half comes from Canada, and much of the rest comes from the Persian Gulf and from OPEC countries. Why wouldn't they just use the oil that they produce? The problem is that the United States lacks the capacity to refine all the crude oil that it produces into fuels such as gasoline and diesel. It has primarily the capacity to produce light sweet oil, but most refineries in the US are designed to process heavy sour oil. It boils down to simple economics. Overseas oil, even after shipping costs, is often cheaper than domestically produced oil. Many companies, as a result, import the types of oils for which they have the existing refining infrastructures. Now, to answer the question why we're constantly being told that oil is running out, we must enter the realm of speculation. One theory is that periodic energy crises are used by politicians to criticize their incumbent. It's leveraged to achieve political ambitions in the energy sector. But there are also real concerns about whether we can produce enough oil to satisfy the global demand. and some earlier claims were perhaps rooted in insufficient research. The amount of crude oil we produce is thus more dependent on the political will to allow extraction, our own inventiveness, and our technical ingenuity, rather than the limitations imposed on us by Mother Nature. At least, for now. If you want to see another video, please consider watching one of these two videos next.
Let's check out the Hindsight YouTube channel. Was the Arab Spring all for nothing? Or you will believe what Egypt is doing here? Centennial, how Italy's insurance got. Or how the Dutch realized it. There are a lot of videos that I haven't actually. The reason why the US stopped. Very sad carefully. These ones though, okay, I am really sure I have all watched these. I think I've also watched that. The Greek Civil War, I don't think I have. Ontong Java, the Arab Spring. Damn, their first video had 1 million views. It's going popular. I was really sure the immigration crisis. Ooh. I don't know. Maybe you could go here. Oof.
Egypt has a massive problem. The war in Ukraine Egypt has a massive problem. The war in Ukraine led to a stark increase of global food prices. Egypt imports almost all its food, and 80% of its wheat comes from Russia and Ukraine. Many families are now dependent on food subsidies, which is costing the Egyptian government billions of dollars. Their cities are overpopulated, their agricultural land is shrinking, and to fix all these issues, Egypt proposed several bold solutions. The first is a new administrative capital, which intends to release pressure from Cairo, and it's full of ostentatious displays of wealth. The second is the new Nile Delta, a section of the desert they're irrigating to create new farmland. And now they're considering to build a mini Suez Canal. Just west of the Nile Delta, there's a valley with an average depth of 60 meters or 200 feet below sea level. The idea is to dig a canal from the Mediterranean to flood this valley. This would make the surrounding lands suitable for agriculture. These projects are impressive in scale and ambition, but Egypt certainly can't afford them. Their leader is an autocrat, and I kid you not, his military and police force looks like this. Is this a stroke of genius, or is it the vision of a madman?
الأكلة اللي هي بسيطة نيجي تكلفة عالية جدا جدا يعني.
This is Egypt's food crisis with hindsight. Imagine yourself after a day of sightseeing in Egypt, longing to watch your favorite show on Netflix, but when you enter the room, you have to connect to the hotel Wi-Fi. You need to enter your passport to enter Netflix, and then when you're in, your favorite show is unavailable. But luckily, CyberGhost VPN, the sponsor of today's video, has the answer. I open it here, and then I select a country, say the United States. Then I click on the Start button, and now I can access all content that's available in the United States, from streaming services to the news and sporting events. It is that easy. CyberGhost also lets me browse completely anonymously, and they protect my data while connecting to public Wi-Fi or while making online purchases. If you get one license, you can use CyberGhost VPN on 7 devices. meaning that you can share this with 6 of your friends. They are trusted by 38 million people worldwide, and they have an excellent Trustpilot rating. Through my link in the description, you get an 83% discount and just pay $2.03 per month. They even give you 4 months for free. In case you change your mind, they offer a...
Oh, who's this? Hey, randomly scrolled on Twitch on my phone because I'm bored and came across your stream. I also live stream into YouTube. On YouTube, I do cute try-on hauls and yoga. You can find my stuff from YouTube by searching SK8Bay69 if you want to check me and my content out. Also my special site is Thunders and Fire Chats and see me under the video serum and Hamzo_14. Huh. I don't know. What should I do to you? We'll just leave it there.
a 45-day money-back guarantee. If you think that this could be for you, click the link and consider their offer. And now, back to the video. Egypt's reliance on imported foods is a relatively new phenomenon. For millennia, Egypt has been a nation of farmers. They produced sufficiently to meet the domestic demand, while also having a surplus for a rainy day. The key to their success was the Nile River, which flooded yearly and provided its banks with the essential nutrients for growing crops. By the mid-20th century, their premium source of wealth was cotton. At this time, there had emerged a class of wealthy landowners who was reaping most of the profits. Just 0.5% of the population owned more than a third of all arable land. But the overall productivity and trade were dropping, and combined with this sense of inequality, this created the conditions for a revolution. This was at a time where Gamal Abdel Nasser was gaining popularity and would eventually become Egypt's president. The 1952 Land Reform Law took the land from these wealthy landowners and they redistributed them to small farmers. By the time that Nasser left office in 1970, small farmers and wage workers were earning twice as much, and roughly 15% of all arable land had been redistributed. This might on the surface appear as a positive development, but the flip side was that these small farms were unable to use many of the modern techniques that made the larger farms so efficient. This resulted in domestically grown food to become much more expensive than the imported foods. So in the 1980s and 90s, many politicians began to push for deregulation. They wanted to restore the larger farms, and to put it lightly, they did so forcibly. In just a few years, over 1 million small farmers had to give up their business, and large land-owning families would once again dominate the industry. The agricultural sector today is no longer characterized by small farmers producing for a domestic market, but by large industrial plants that mainly export high-value crops to markets in Europe. Food in Egypt is now mostly imported, at a cost of about $62 billion per year. And the problem is that this is 3 times higher than the value of their agricultural exports. On top of that, their population is growing fast, from 71 million in 2000 to 110 million in 2022. This is where Egypt's mega projects come into play.
What year did
In
this shot? Is that 2011? Right. It's like the
2000 to 110 million in 2022. This is where Egypt's mega projects come into play. Egypt's president, Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, is building a new capital city east of Cairo, in the middle of the desert. Cairo is polluted, congested, and it has one of the highest population densities of any city in the world. This new city houses a huge presidential palace, dozens of ministry buildings, a new sports complex, and a massive park that's twice the size of New York's Central Park. It already has the tallest tower in Africa, and they're building the biggest cathedral in the Middle East and the largest mosque in Africa, with room for over 100,000 worshippers. But perhaps the most talked about feature is the Octagon, the new headquarters of the Ministry of Defense. Egypt's military is about the size of Vietnam's, but their headquarters is 8 times bigger than the Pentagon. The new headquarters of the Ministry of Defense. Egypt's military is about the size of Vietnam's, but their headquarters is 8 times bigger than the Pentagon and has a total area of 22,000 acres or 89 square kilometers, making it the largest defense headquarters of any country in the world. Egypt is spending tens of billions of dollars on this new city, and their official justification is to relieve Cairo, but it also appears to serve a political purpose. This city keeps the government at a safe distance from large protests like those in 2011. They are surrounded by the military and protected by several checkpoints. The second mega project is located on the other side of the Nile Delta, where Egypt is planning to irrigate this section of the desert in what it calls the new Nile Delta. The Nile River ends in the Mediterranean, and the fresh water that reaches the sea is called wastewater. The plan is to redirect this water with a canal and underground tubes to the El Hammam wastewater treatment plant, while also redirecting water from the Nile River. These water sources, together with treated groundwater, are then used to irrigate the desert to make it suitable for agriculture. The main goal is to use this land to cultivate wheat. This is the food product that's most affected by the war in Ukraine, and that's costing the Egyptian government billions each year in subsidies. This project is also expected to reduce Egypt's overall dependency on food imports by about 1/3. The project, the approach, and the goals are generally well received, but many Egyptians criticize the idea because it's costing the government billions of dollars. Egypt already has dangerous levels of national debt, and they keep loaning more. The main point of criticism is whether it's responsible for Egypt to spend this amount of money on an irrigation project. And then in 2023, Egypt announced contracts for a new feasibility study to build a mini Suez Canal. The idea to build a canal and flood the Qattara Depression goes back decades and was initially intended to generate electricity. The water of this lake would quickly evaporate, and it would be necessary to have a constant flow of water from the Mediterranean. This provides an opportunity to generate hydroelectric power. This evaporation would also cool the region, and it would increase rainfall, making the surrounding lands suitable for agriculture. This project is also expected to drop global sea levels by about 2 millimeters, and it would provide plenty of new jobs. But there are also drawbacks. The valley is connected to the Nubian sandstone aquifer in the south and in the east, and the Nile Delta aquifer to the northeast. If the valley is flooded with salt water, this might negatively affect these sweet water supplies, and it could even turn oases in other parts of the Sahara brackish. Through continued cycles of evaporation, the lake would also become increasingly salty. Some fear that this might increase the salinity of the soil of existing farmland, and there are doubts about the ecological value of this lake after continued cycles of increasing salinity. There are also technical challenges. Some of the suggested routes avoid hills and hard rock, while others go through softer rock but are longer, and there isn't yet a clear consensus on the best way to approach this. The new administrative capital, the new Nile Delta, and now potentially also the Qattara Depression project are all examples of Sisi's government trying to claim legitimacy. He implements his reforms through the military, who is taking control over increasingly large parts of the economy. Soldiers provide cheap labor, and the broad presence of the military can detect discontent at an early stage. This model has been described as a military with a state attached. These projects are unlikely to solve the food shortages and overpopulation in the short term, and what he will do next will probably be what's best for him. Don't forget to click on the description link to get the special discount CyberGhost VPN is granting to our channel's viewers. This application will protect your data while you browse online and gives you full access to all blocked content on the internet for just $2.03 per month. It is totally risk-free, so check it out. Link in the description. And if you don't want to stop watching our videos, here are 2 more videos that you can consider for your next. This is the Dubai that we often see. Glitter, glamour, and over-the-top wealth.
The golden car collection of Dubai.
But only a few miles from the world's tallest skyscraper, 7-star hotels, and luxury yachts, there is a parallel universe where tens of thousands of people are trapped in slave-like conditions. The UAE is in the top 10 on the global slavery index, but here's the story that only a few people talk about. Long before oil, Dubai was already a melting pot of cultures. Their main economic activity was pearl diving, fishing, and trade. About half their population already consisted of foreign workers, and they were an active part of Dubai society. But in their transition to oil wealth, a handful of families consolidated all power, and they created this highly stratified society against a backdrop of human suffering. This is Dubai's dark secret, with hindsight. Dubai's economy is thriving, unlike that of the rest of the world. All highly developed countries are currently fighting recessions that are rapidly destroying their citizens' wealth. Even in the US, most Americans believe that they need $1.4 million to retire, a 50% increase over just the last 4 years. But will the free market save our bank accounts? Goldman Sachs gives us the bad news. They expect that the usual stock and bond portfolio that so many people rely on will underperform for the next decade. So what do they recommend? In one word, diversify. Like the tens of thousands of active Masterworks investors who diversified into a low correlation asset while collecting over $55 million in proceeds along the way. See, today's sponsor, Masterworks' art investing platform, lets you invest in contemporary art. This asset isn't correlated to the typical markets like stocks or bonds, and Masterworks offers their blue chip paintings to investors in the form of shares. You can diversify into multiple artworks while also controlling the amount that you invest. Then, if a work you invested in sells for a profit, you receive the proceeds. Some past offerings have sold in minutes, but you can skip the waitlist and start investing today by going to the QR code on screen or by clicking the link in the description. Today, Dubai's population exists for 90% of migrant workers, and this group is essential for sustaining Dubai's economic growth. But this is nothing new. In the early 1950s, Dubai was inhabited by about 20,000 people. They had a tribal culture that was mostly reliant on agriculture, fishing, and pearling. Dubai was inhabited by many Persians, many of whom came from Linga, in modern-day Iran. Linga used to be an important trade hub for goods from Asia, but in 1903, their government imposed high taxes on exports, forcing many merchant families to move. The ruler of Dubai was known for its relative liberal economic policies and its tolerance of different cultures and religions. So many of these families moved, and its tolerance of different cultures and religions. So many of these families moved to Dubai, and they took their business with them. In 1950, a third of Dubai's population were Persians, and they controlled much of the retail trade and the food commerce. There were also many Indians who were primarily employed in banking and retail trade, and most of the Arabs were pearl divers. Dubai's openness to outsiders is deeply embedded in their DNA, but a sudden shift was about to occur. In Kuwait and in Saudi Arabia, large reserves of oil had already been found. The British worked closely with the leaders from these emirates, and they searched for oil. In the late 1950s, Abu Dhabi, got lucky. Dubai saw an opportunity in the success of their neighbor. They dredged and they widened their creek, enabling the transport of large equipment for oil exploration. This new function of Dubai as a transport hub for the oil industry quickly turned into their main source of income. The region was still sparsely populated and undeveloped. There were no paved roads, and there was hardly any running water. In 1956, this became the first concrete building to be built in Dubai, housing the Abu Dhabi Oil Limited Company. 10 years later, Dubai finally found oil, albeit in far smaller quantities than their neighbor. This was a moment of mixed celebration, as Dubai's leadership realized that their oil money would be finite. They only had a small window of opportunity to build new industries for when their oil money would dry up. In 1971, the United Arab Emirates unified as one country. The sheikhs were promised a significant degree of autonomy and control over its internal affairs, and they got lucky from the very start.
There's a crisis of such proportion that we probably haven't even begun to grasp it yet.
The 1973 oil crisis led to a boom in oil prices, providing the rulers of Dubai with incredible amounts of public revenue. But they realized something else. On the other side of the peninsula in Lebanon, a civil war had broken out and its capital Beirut turned into the front line of this war. The downtown area, where most commercial activity took place, was a barren war zone. Before the war, Beirut is what Dubai is today. It had a thriving banking and financial sector with relatively liberal policies. They were a playground for wealthy Arabs and Westerners who now had to travel much farther to find similar services. Dubai was getting ready to take their place. They invested in a series of large infrastructure projects, starting off with the Dubai World Trade Center, at that time the tallest building in the Arab world. Then they invested in their airport, building a new terminal, runways, and hangars, facilitating the emergence of Dubai as a global hub for transportation. They built new town centers, residential areas, and industrial zones. All of this emerged in a matter of a few years, and to facilitate this growth, Dubai imported thousands of laborers. Between the oil boom of 1973 and 2000, there were several waves of mass migration. The first migrants came from Arab countries like Yemen, Egypt, and Jordan, and Great Britain imported many highly skilled laborers from India, and they made sure that no other Western power would get too involved that they could threaten their exclusive access to this wealth. The leaders of the UAE rigorously prioritized enriching only the indigenous people who lived in this region when oil was found. They even excluded those who had left the Emirates in the 1940s and 50s to chase the oil booms of Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. But this was at a time where pan-Arabism, an ideology that Arab nations should unite as one country, was gaining popularity. The leaders of the UAE feared that importing non-local Arab workers could spread radical social and political ideas that could threaten their rule. This is why in Dubai, the UAE, and across the Gulf, leaders began viewing Asian migrants as less threatening. Dubai had tried from the onset to attract foreign business and to develop as a trade hub, but to protect their monarchy and absolute power, they created a class of mostly Asian servants that they could fully control. When in 2000, the oil prices nearly tripled, Dubai set off to develop their largest projects to date, like the Burj Khalifa, the tallest building in the world, and the Palm Jumeirah, one of the world's largest man-made islands. Dubai's urban area expanded rapidly, and its population exploded. Many unskilled and semi-skilled workers came from Southeast Asia, and they worked under the kafala system. In practice, how it works is that workers are recruited in their home countries by so-called labor supply agencies. They often have to pay thousands of dollars in fees, and when they arrive in Dubai, their passports are seized, and their compensation turns out to be much less than that they were promised. They are now in debt, they cannot leave, and they end up in labor camps where fires, outbreaks of diseases, and poor living conditions are widely reported. Modern slavery is defined as situations of exploitation that a person cannot refuse or leave because of threats, violence, coercion, or deception. This seems to be a textbook example. The kafala system enables Dubai to quickly import labor when times are good and to quickly expel labor when times are bad, like in 2008.
No region is immune from the global financial turmoil.
The housing market collapse created one financial crisis after another.
In the early 2000s, Dubai's growth was fueled mostly by real estate. There was so much faith in Dubai's invincibility that it became incredibly easy for people to get credit to buy property. But when that system collapsed, it caused housing prices to drop with a remarkable 40%, by far the biggest drop anywhere in the world. Many construction projects were either cancelled or paused, and foreign workers were placed on unpaid vacation or they were laid off. These ruling families were given all the money in the world, and they chose to build a system that prioritizes profit over humanity. A system that turned individuals into commodities to be exploited for economic gain. And this is not unique to Dubai. This is happening across the Gulf. This kind of system, where the majority of people is exploited for the benefits of a few, has historically failed to innovate, expand, and to attract genuine investment. The global financial crisis showed that even a diversified economy like Dubai's is vulnerable. In 1975, the energy sector made up over half of Dubai's economy, and by 2018, it was less than 2%, with wholesale and retail trade, transport and logistics, financial services and insurance, and manufacturing making up the largest contributors to Dubai's GDP. But yet, Dubai took a massive hit when the real estate market collapsed in 2008. Abu Dhabi provided Dubai with an emergency loan, proving to be a vital lifeline. And this is their major advantage. They still have plenty of oil in the ground. Abu Dhabi's proven wells can continue at current rates for another 80 years. Dubai's economy today is bigger, more diverse, and more integrated than ever before. And projections are generally positive. Their airport is the world's busiest by international passenger traffic, and their 2 airlines are amongst the top 10 safest in the world. It's admirable how airlines
Etihad Airways is headquartered in Abu Dhabi.
are amongst the top 10 safest in the world. It's admirable how they managed to diversify, and they undeniably have also made a series of good decisions. Compared to other countries in the Gulf, they have even done a lot to address the issues that face foreign workers. But most of these policies failed due to poor enforcement. Dubai is revered in the Gulf. Countries like Saudi Arabia and Qatar are trying to copy their economic model, with mega projects and reforms to open up to the West. And I'll leave it up for another video why I think this will fail. But Dubai is focusing on building a domestic market. They're building low and mid-level income housing. They're investing in public beaches and parks, and they're further opening up to the West.
Dubai has scrapped its alcohol tax by 30%.
The moves are expected to boost the appeal of Dubai for tourists and expat workers.
They got rid of a 30% alcohol tax. They adopted the Western Saturday-Sunday weekend instead of the Islamic Friday-Saturday weekend.
The move is in a bid to make Dubai more attractive than neighbouring cities.
The sad truth is that they still have so much power and money that they can likely continue on this path. Dubai is amongst the least equal places on earth, with some of the highest numbers of modern slaves. But they now also have the opportunity to lead the region away from exploitative labor practices. Dubai once thrived as a melting pot of cultures that actively participated in society. This is deeply embedded in their DNA, and with a 90% expat community that is unlikely to ever go away. If Dubai would demonstrate how inclusive, fair labor practices would benefit their economy, it might not just lead to long-term sustainable growth, it could also have a ripple effect to other countries in the Gulf. If you want to see another
Right, I think that's it for now. I think we're gonna end it there. It's It's now June, so it's also 12:45 a.m. You need to sleep, right? Goodbye.